Hello and welcome to this episode of TGE's Current Read. I'm your host, Sam Herbst, and today I'm chatting to multi-talented, internationally best-selling author ML Rio. My personal obsession with Rio began with her debut novel, now a bit of a cult classic, I think, If We Were Villains. The author then penned the USA best-selling novella Graveyard Shift, after which she began work in earnest on Hot Wax, a second novel that balances her love for Shakespeare and literature, evident in Villains, with her music obsession, which comes out really strong and solidly in Hot Wax. Now joining us from South Philadelphia on the tail end of her tour for Hot Wax, ML Rio, a very warm welcome to TGE's Current Read.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, I've been so excited to speak with you. Let me just say, and I don't say this lightly, If We Were Villains, I read last year this time for book club. And I'm a literature major myself. I adored the structure, I adored the characters, and it's one of those books that really stuck with me throughout the course of 2025. You know how just you have this like nagging, like, oh, that's like that character, or it just stuck with you. So when I saw Hot Wax was on the cards, I was thrilled.
Well, that's great to hear. It's always nice to know that a book has staying power like that to kind of hang around after someone has finished reading it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Definitely. My first question, before we get stuck into what Hot Wax is all about, I think If We Were Villains had this, to me, it was like a cult-like success. I didn't see it like commercially splashed all over the place in South Africa, but you know, those TikTokers, BookTok were all over it, and it was just kind of this like whispering among readers, have you read this novel? Have you, So what was it like writing, a book like Hot Wax off of the success of If We Were Villains?
Well, it was a bit of a mixed blessing, actually. Villains had a very strange publication journey. The reason you didn't see a lot of, kind of commercial fanfare around it when it came out was because there wasn't any. When this book first came out, or when Villains first came out, nobody bought it, nobody read it. My own publisher didn't want to hear from me, and I was basically told for the next couple of years in the industry that I was never going to get published again because the sales numbers weren't very good. And that could be for all kinds of reasons, just what else the imprint was focused on. And I think we kind of targeted the wrong readership when it first came out. And I was so young when that book was published that I was not terribly well equipped to kind of handle that situation and sort of really get in the pit and fight for the book. But it did sort of find its people like 3 years after the fact. It kind of took off in 2020, which I think had a lot to do with the pandemic and the way people were just reading more in general. And a specific kind of reader as well. A lot of bookish, kind of nerdy young students who are really the target audience for that book were looking forward to going off to school or going back to school. And then because of the pandemic, didn't get to do that and went looking for what we used to call campus novels as kind of a vicarious version of that experience. And Villains just kind of happened to already be there because I was a few years ahead of the curve on the whole dark academia trend. I sort of got grandfathered into that. That was never something that was never something I was consciously participating in. Like when I wrote Villains in 2014, dark academia as a concept didn't exist. So I just sort of got caught up in the dragnet of that whole thing, which I'm grateful for because it did make it possible for me to get another book published. But it was also a little bit difficult because once Villains did kind of accrue this kind of cult success, if you want to call it that, nobody wanted me to do anything else. I had this other novel that I had been working on and in love with for a really long time. And a lot of the people I spoke to in publishing said, but can it just be more like If We Were Villains? Can it just be Villains Part 2, which was not what I wanted to do. So I actually had to fight really hard for Hot Wax. And it took a lot of time and effort to find kind of the right team for that book. But and there's still some difficulty with it. Like there are a lot of readers who will never forgive me for just not writing a villains sequel. But I never thought of myself as a genre writer and really wanted to be able to kind of branch out. So yeah, I knew some people weren't going to love it. And I think that the people who do love it, really love it, and really get it. So that's about what I expected, honestly.
You know what? So, Donna Tartt as well, you could say, was grandfathered into dark academia with a secret history. And that was like, if I might be mistaken, but early 90s when Secret History came
Yeah.
out. And then this has been slotted in with that. I loved it. As I said, I'm a book nerd and a literary major and student, and love the structure. Love the characters of if we are villains, but Hot Wax got me because we're coming off of the back. Speaking of 2020, Daisy Jones and the Six, and like this is a lot grittier in my opinion. But I also interviewed Holly Brickley on Deep Cuts, and I think, and as I was reading this, I finished it over the weekend. I was away, and it just caught the eye of so many people that we were in a big group of about 25 people, and they kept stopping me and they're like, what's this about? And when I gave them like a brief elevator pitch, they were like, oh, but have you read this? And have you done, and then they going into kind of muso-biographies and stuff like that. And I think there's quite a niche audience for that. But at the same time, I can see your writing style come in like solidly throughout both of the novels. So I don't know. I'm a fan.
Thank
I'm
you.
a fan of both.
Thank you. I mean, that's the hope. I do think that the books actually have a lot more in common than people maybe notice on the surface level. There are some features of my work that are going to happen in everything I write, and this is true of Graveyard Shift too. I always like a big group of characters instead of just kind of one main character. I get bored easily without an ensemble cast.
Yeah.
And a rock band is kind of the perfect venue for that because you have not just the people on stage, but also the people behind the scenes and on the road crew, that kind of thing. It's also very invested in performance in the same way that Villains is. I'm a performance studies scholar is one of the other hats that I wear. And I always find it kind of a delicious challenge as a writer to represent live performance on the page and to kind of read performance as a literary critic. So it just made a lot of sense to kind of move into a different lane with a different kind of performance there in Hot Wax because, I'm every bit as much in love with dad rock, for lack of a better term, as I am with Shakespeare, and actually kind of discovered those things at about the same time. So for me, there's a lot of kinship between the two books, but yeah, it's definitely more on the R-rated end of the spectrum as these books go.
Definitely, I do, and I have to say there is a part I should have also mapped that part out because we discussed parts to map out and to kind of link the audience with kind of a section, which we'll get to in a bit. But there's one section where you deep dive into the music, and you're literally writing as each instrument comes into this, and as the music, as the one track builds in this live performance. And I'm like, that is unique. I don't think I've ever read anything like that. So I suspect South African readers who love music, and we are lovers of live music in this country, I do think that it'll hit a spot for sure. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because nobody knows here, or few people listening will know yet what Hot Wax is all about. So I don't know if you have an elevator pitch for us.
I do, yeah. You do 35 tour dates and you come up with a pretty succinct elevator pitch. So I pitched this book to my agent as this is Spinal Tap meets Thelma and Louise. And I feel like I've been dating myself with that reference because I sometimes say that in front of an audience and it's just like crickets because I think everyone's just too young.
Yeah.
Which surprised me considering the Spinal Tap 2 just came out, but anyway. So Hot Wax is told in two timelines, an A-side and a B-side, kind of like a vinyl record. And on the A-side timeline, our main character, Suzanne, is 10 years old. She is on the road with her father's rock band for a disastrous concert tour in the summer of 1989. And then in the B-side timeline, it's 2018, and she is in her early 40s and kind of on the run from some stuff in her personal life and finds herself retracing the steps of that concert tour 30 years ago.
And you do mention, there's one part where you mention the title, Hot Wax, or kind of reference it. And it's a scene with Phoebe. That's the A-side, right? Am I right or wrong? Phoebe and Simon, they're the A-side.
The phrase Hot Wax never actually gets dropped in the text, but there are a lot of there are a lot of themes with that title, and it's sort of a literally and metaphorically because wax is slang for vinyl, so that comes up a couple of times. And hot wax can refer to all kinds of things, like a record that just came out. It could also refer to bootleg records. It has many resonances throughout the text.
Okay, there's one scene that I'm thinking of with Phoebe and Simon, which is the 2018 kind of narrative arc, and they mention kind of when the vinyl kind of gets too hot that they got to keep it cool at some point. But I have to say, speaking of your ensemble cast, I've written down like Suzanne, Simon, Phoebe, Nathan, Nora, Rob, Gil, Gracie, Skelly, Doug, all of these people that I've come to know, Nash, Ruby, Carney. I've written all of their names down. Rob is the ex or the husband that we come to learn that Suzanne, our protagonist, is running away from. And I have to say, this guy, in South Africa, we have a phrase, it's like shame. And I sadly resonated with him as someone who also just doesn't know the difference between an LP and a record. And I'm like, I'm so uncool, man.
The funny thing that happened when this book first came out is a lot of readers were complaining that they were confused by the timeline, and it took me a while to realize that many of my young readers had no idea what A-side and B-side meant.
Yeah.
And that was part of the reason they were not following the timeline.
I mean, I got
So
that
actually,
at least. I'm not that young.
that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. But yeah, I had to make a reel explaining how vinyl works because a lot of my early readers were quite young people who just had no idea what I was talking about with that.
So I definitely love the structure. You pulled a 5 act structure following Shakespeare in If We Were Villains. I love the A side, B side. Totally got that. When Rob mentions, he's like, what's the difference between an LP and a record? And what's, we're dealing with CDs and we're dealing with cassette tapes, and it's all these old references to music. And of course, the epic playlist that you've got going, and music references in the chapter heads. I'm like, that's a lyric from a song. What song? And I had to sit and think. There's a lot of depth to it. We'll talk about the hit list, the Hot Wax hit list on Spotify. But what did you want to explore with this novel, essentially? Is there a bottom line that you wanted to bring across? Because like I said, I do think your voice comes across so strongly. If the readers are If We Were Villain fans, I don't think they'll be disappointed in the voice, but I feel like there is a bit of a different message that you were trying to explore, a thread that you were pulling.
Sure. I mean, I never set out to write a novel with like a message with a capital M in mind because I think that gets very tiresome very quickly. I always start from a place of I want to write a good story about interesting people. And then in the process of, revising once I get a first draft down on paper, that's really where I figure out what I'm actually talking about and what's actually important at the core of a story. And, a novel like Hot Wax is capacious. It's 125,000 words. It's quite long. And it's quite a slow burn until about halfway through the book, which is intentional. I've seen it getting misshelved as horror and misshelved as thriller, and I don't really know why that's happening, but it's not either of those things. It's not supposed to be moving at the speed of light from the very beginning. But, it started much like Villains from a place of just deep love of the material. I really, really love music and particularly 20th century pop culture and the way that physical media is such an important part of that. I grew up before the internet. I was a child of the 90s, and my relationship with music and with physical media was so different from what a lot of kids who were or people who were even 10 years younger than me grew up with. So I spent most of my childhood making my own mixtapes, like recording cassettes off the radio, making CDs for my friends when I was in high school, lying on the floor listening to the radio all day, just like waiting for that one song to come on.
Yep.
And then ended up working for a magazine called The Vinyl District when I was a little bit older and getting really deep into just like record nerd culture. And I was like, oh, these are my people. These are my people who desperately, desperately love the music, but are also like very invested in the record as a physical object, because I think there's much greater intentionality with the way we experience art when we have a tactile relationship with it. So nostalgia is a big part of this book, of course. It's a book about stuff. It's not just a book about records and cassette tapes. It's also a book about vintage clothes. It's a book about all the costumes. It's a book about cars. It's a book about food. It's a book about this kind of sensory culture that I feel like we're kind of losing our grip on as everything moves into an increasingly digital sphere. But there is kind of a dark side to nostalgia in this book, which is trauma, is the flip side of that.
Yeah.
And that's where the structure of the record comes in as well. Because I'm very interested in form and structure, because like I have a PhD in literature and we spend a lot of time talking about this kind of thing. You're right, Villains very deliberately mimics the structure of a Shakespearean tragedy, which is why you have acts and scenes instead of traditional chapters. And Hot Wax in the same way, the form kind of mimics the content. And that's true of like music as a theme, but it's also true of this mechanism of trauma, which is essentially you experience something so disturbing or you witness something so disturbing that your brain can't comprehend it in the moment. So you're forced to kind of revisit that moment over and over again until you can sort of, hopefully, someday assimilate it into your daily life. And a record does something similar. You know, you put a needle in a groove and it goes
Mm.
around and around and around in concentric circles that get smaller and smaller and smaller until you finally arrive at a point. And that structure was really key to me thinking about the storylines in this book because it ultimately is about Suzanne negotiating these very complicated memories of the most important summer of her life that was like the happiest that she's ever been and also the scariest things that have ever happened to her at the same time and how she kind of braids that experience into her life after that. So really for me the central question of the book is how does this particular 10-year-old turn into this particular
Mm.
40-year-old. I don't particularly care if you like Suzanne. I think a character can be much more interesting things than likable. So by the end of the story I don't really care if you like her. I do care if you understand why she is the way she is and why she does what she does.
I love that a character can be so much more than just likable. I say this all the time to readers who are just like, ugh, like All Fours by Miranda July. You have
Hmm.
people who love it and you have people who hate it, and they're just like, I just couldn't with the protagonist. I'm like, you don't have to. She doesn't actually need you to like her. See what's
Yeah.
happening. You know, there's so much grittiness to and realism and relatability to what's happening, and I think it's very similar for me with Suzanne. I mean, you don't want to box it. You have a PhD in literature. This is, exactly up your alley. I wouldn't want to box it. However, I did kind of see Suzanne's story as a coming of age, but you've done something interesting with the structure that makes it not strictly a Bildungsroman.
Yeah, I heard, I wish I'd thought of this myself because it was such a good turn of phrase, but I had a reader refer to it as a second coming of age story, which I really, really
Mm.
loved. And that was actually, I'm glad you brought up Miranda July because I think that's actually a good point of comparison because one of the other major themes of this book that hasn't been talked about as much, just because the band kind of sucks up so much bandwidth as they should. It's hard to make
As
a
they
rock
do,
band
yeah.
subtle. But there's a lot of other things going on in this book, and one of them is this kind of negotiation of what you were supposed to be doing with yourself as a woman in middle age and in your 30s.
Yeah.
The whole time I was working on this book, and I wrote the first version of this book way back in 2016. So I've been mucking around with some version of Hot Wax for like almost 10 years. And I my first novel came out when I was 25. There's a lot of daylight between 25 and 35. You are a
Mm-hmm.
different person by the time you get to 35. And one thing I observed that definitely kind of inflected the writing of this book was just that all of the women I knew seemed to be going slightly insane for completely justifiable reasons because there is this bizarre kind of gap in our cultural meta narratives where we get a lot of strong messaging about what you're supposed to be doing in your 20s. You're finding yourself, you're going to college, you're falling in love, you're sowing your wild oats, whatever it is. And then in your 30s, there's this just vacuum of that where everyone is like, what the heck are you supposed to be doing? Are you supposed to be getting married, settling down, having kids? Are you supposed to be out there girl bossing it? Are you somehow supposed to be doing both at the same time? Nobody knows. And it feels like no matter what you're doing, it's wrong. And interestingly, I think literature kind of mimics that. Like we
Mm-hmm.
have this enormous category of YA that is intended for people kind of 17 to 24. We keep trying to make new adult happen and it's just like not happening. We've been trying to make new adult happen since like 2014 when I was working in a bookstore. But then you have to kind of make this leap into really dry, depressing fiction that's all about people in their 50s getting divorced.
Yes.
And there's not a lot in the middle. And as a very avid reader in my 30s, I was like, why is there nothing here for me? And I kind of had this moment of like, okay, well, if it doesn't exist, maybe I need to write it myself. And I didn't want it to be another very hyper literary kind of introspective novel that mostly takes place in the character's head and there's no actual action on the page.
Mm.
I've always wanted to write books that feel like you can kind of climb inside and live there for a while. So, A Hot Wax, it is this kind of big, loud, gritty, messy sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of setting, environment, narrative. But at the same time, there's this whole other subterranean plot line about this woman in her early 40s who has never felt like she's found her right place in the world and kind of trying to figure out how to do that.
She speaks to Phoebe at one point about Suzanne does. I mean, it's really just a brief exchange where they're busy talking about, why she married this man. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Phoebe knows a different version of Suzanne to the person who married this, for lack of a better term, pretty dull, straightforward, vanilla white bread man. And
Mm-hmm.
she was just like, it's all about playing roles, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
she played the role. There was nothing else. Things get lonely. Everybody's kind of marrying off. And if you don't kind of participate in the societal expectation, then you end up being excluded and you can just disappear. It's kind of an invisibility tactic of modern society.
Yeah, she calls it a social extinction event.
Yes, exactly that.
She says staying single past a certain age is a social extinction event, and it's true. And that's shifting a little bit as, especially in the States for reasons that are probably obvious. More and more women are just not getting married or getting married much later. And I think that's a positive change that women are feeling like they don't have to be trapped in a relationship to be happy or considered a whole person. But, it's like 33% more expensive just to exist as a single person when you're not
Yeah.
sharing expenses with somebody else and when you're not sharing, you're not pooling your taxes, that kind of thing. And there is this other thing that happens where at a certain age, a lot of your friends will get married off, have kids, settle down. And if you remain single at that point, they will kind of forget how to talk to you.
Mm.
They'll stop inviting you to things because there's just no kind of cultural touch point for people who don't do that, for people who don't participate in that kind of nuclear family. I don't want to call it a conveyor belt because that sounds crass, but we do call it like the relationship escalator. People who are not on the relationship
For sure.
escalator
Yeah.
sometimes get sort of lost in the shuffle socially. And the thing is, like obviously I'm speaking from an American perspective, and this book is very much about the failure of the American dream, and I could not have predicted how timely that was going to end up being.
Exactly.
Um, but I was very interested, as a person who I'm not married, I don't have kids, those things are not in the cards for me just because I'm not really interested in doing that. And I was sort of curious about, okay, how are people building lives on the margins that don't fit into this box? If you don't follow this relationship escalator, if you don't fit into this kind of nuclear family mold, what then is left for you as an
Mm.
option to build community and build stability and build a life?
Mm.
So that's an open question in the book as well. It's about what happens when people who shouldn't get married and have kids get married and have kids,
Fuck yeah.
and what the options are if you're not going to do that.
I'm interested because obviously Suzanne has a very strong voice in your head. You've got a lot of ideas, but I don't ever feel like it's like, oh, Suzanne mirrors the author. This is, there's a lot of the author in this character. It's so obvious sometimes and a bit of a cliche in a lot of books, but I just feel like Suzanne came across as a really strong character in your head. And I hate
Yeah.
I don't know, do you call characters vehicles? Can they be a vehicle for your idea, or does she appear to you? Is she human to you?
Oh no, she's very human to me. I never approach characterization as trying to have a character represent an idea or an archetype. And actually, Villains is all about the failure of typecasting.
Mm.
Villains is all about how typecasting people in real life doesn't really work. No, for me, especially because I do write these big kind of sprawling casts of characters, I think it's really crucial that they all feel like fully formed people. And that is certainly the way that I think of them. I don't think of any of them as kind of like stand-ins for particular messages or ideas. And I don't base fictional characters on real people, including myself. None of these characters are a self-insert. Suzanne is not supposed to be me
Mm.
because, first of all, that's a great way to get sued. Second of all, it's really lazy writing.
Yeah.
Instead, when I'm crafting a cast of characters, I think a lot about who are the personality types that you would probably encounter in this room? The joke that I make is that I've lived most of my life backstage in one way or another. I've worked in the theater for decades. I've worked with musicians for a really long time. I've been on the road with traveling bands. I spend a lot of time doing reviews and artist interviews, that kind of thing. So there are types of personalities that you encounter in these businesses. Like you need a certain kind of a personality to be a front man. Like you just need a couple of like special ingredients in order to do that well. In the same way, you need a really different kind of personality to have someone who really wants to be a bass player,
Mm.
like someone who doesn't want to be in that spotlight, but really wants to be the backbone of the rhythm section. So in much the same way that with villains, I was thinking about like who are the character types that you might encounter in a room with a group of Shakespearean actors rehearsing. I was thinking very much about like, okay, what are the different personality types that you might encounter in this space? But then letting those people become fully formed individual people who are
Mm.
not just kind of cookie cutter central casting kind of characters.
I think there's a lot of magic to it to kind of know your characters so intimately. Even the the supporting cast, the Dougs, the Carnies, Nash, Rubies of the world. I've got a really soft spot for Doug. I think that's obvious and intentional. I don't know
Yeah,
who
Doug is
wouldn't.
definitely the crowd favorite. We had a running joke that we should make Team Doug baseball hats on the on the team for this book because we all loved Doug so
Sold.
much.
I would buy it. I would buy that merch. But you don't, you don't have Doug's character Bible in here. You don't have so much of that texture. But because you are, as a writer, so intimately familiar with these characters, it definitely comes through. And I think that that's such a special. You don't often find it. I mean, you do with good writing, but you don't. It doesn't come through in across all pages. Sometimes characters are flat, and I think your characters are as rich as the art that gets woven through. You're dealing with music, obviously. This is a very musical book, music centered, music driven. But Suzanne is a photographer. So there's a
Mhm.
lot on Polaroids and kind of the classic camera and film work that weaves its way in. And then you mention, of course, the vintage clothing and that. It just makes for a really rich, it's all part of the setting, I think, that you weave into the novel.
Yeah, and setting is big for me. I always like to kind of, again, like give a reader a world that it feels like they can live in for a while. And with Hot Wax, that was challenging because nobody's in the same place for more than one chapter, one scene. Every scene we're picking up in a different place as these two road trips kind of run parallel across the country. So, in order to do that well, or really to do that right, I did 6 or 7 coast to coast road trips over the course of like 5 or 6 years during my PhD. In the summer, I would get in the car, drive
Awesome.
all the way to California and back again. And then in 2023, I did like a top-down rewrite of this book with an eye on going on submission in November. And at that point, I said to myself, okay, like the only right way to do this is to really do it. So I sold my house and put all of my stuff that was left in storage. And I lived out of a two-door 2012 Honda for almost 2 years while I was just driving around to research locations and going to as many gigs as I could go to.
Mm.
And that was for exactly the reason you mentioned was I wanted this to feel like a very real um, world that you could step into, and it had to be a different real world on every single chapter because they're always in a different place. So I'm a very like method boots on the ground kind of writer. If I'm going to write about something, I really want to get as close to it as possible. So a lot of the writing process for this book was like I would get up in the morning in the middle of nowhere and drive 4 hours and kind of look at the landscape, get out, do some location research, stop at a diner in the middle of nowhere, write for 2 hours, and then get back in the car and drive for another couple of 100 miles and then bunk down in some like terrifying hotel for the night. And then I would sit down and go, okay, I can do that diner scene now because I was just in this cafe, or I can do that desert scene now because I was just out driving around in West Texas somewhere. And the same thing applied to the music. Music is a really hard thing to write in black and white prose. It's really hard to give somebody a sense of what it feels like to be at a live gig with just words on a page. But I did that for years as a rock critic. Like that was what I do. That's what I do for the Vinyl District as I write about what's it like to be at this concert. And I really love that challenge, that really delicious challenge of like, how do you do justice to something that visceral in prose? And this is quite a gross book. Like a lot of early readers were calling it sweaty, and I was like, yeah, you get it. It's
Sweaty.
it's sweaty, it's gritty, it's greasy, it's grimy. It's because that's what a live rock show is like. You know,
Yeah.
you're in the crowd with a bunch of people jumping around in a mosh pit and everything reeks of cigarettes and hairspray and beer. And I wanted the reader to feel like they were in the middle of it because that's really what's exhilarating about it, that kind of like real animal energy that
Mm.
comes with a killer live show. So that was something that I was kind of missing from a lot of music novels that I was reading that really didn't put it on stage or put it on stage in this very kind of antiseptic way where you're kind of narrowly focused on the performance and not paying much attention to the crowd. But for me, the crowd is half the fun of going to a live show. So that was something I really wanted to put the reader in the middle of as much as possible.
And crazy because through Suzanne's lens, she's 11, but she's
Yeah.
so precocious. I mean, at this stage, she just slots right in, and kind of there's a little bit of a, is that a kid, throughout the novel, but she fits in so well that
Hmm.
it just gets accepted as part of the crazy of rock and roll. I want to ask you this. What is the difference, in your words, as the author, what is the difference between a shit show and a clusterfuck?
Well, Carney defines it. So, what does he say? A shit show is the result of bad planning and poor decision making. Like a shit show is avoidable. A shit show is what happens when the people planning an event like are not doing a good job.
Yeah.
A clusterfuck is the result of that. A clusterfuck is just indiscriminate chaos. It might be a combination of circumstances, bad planning, like all the things at the same time. A shit show is really like the idea of it's a show. Like it was supposed to be a show, things were supposed to go according to plan, and now it's all gone to shit. I think is a good way to think of it. Whereas a clusterfuck is just like nobody knows what's going on. It's just absolute chaos, total pandemonium. And as Carney points out, like a shit show can turn into a clusterfuck very quickly, which is
Yeah.
exactly what happens when the band gets to Nebraska, that infamous
It's a good
Nebraska,
scene.
the infamous Nebraska concert where shit really hits the fan.
It's a clusterfuck. And you have 11-year-old, or almost at that point, it's almost 11-year-old Suzanne going like, okay, we're on. Gracie's kind of arguing with the organizers and being like, no, we're going on. Take it or leave it kind of thing. And it was Connie that tells Suzanne to head to her dad and say they're going on in 10 minutes. And then he's like,
Hmm.
Gil, her dad, who's the frontman of the band, says, so what's it like? And she goes, it's a clusterfuck. You just imagine this 11-year-old little girl. And nobody kind of moves at that except for Skelly. He's the only character that does. And it's really like little fine moments like that embody this band like atmosphere that you capture so well. And like I mentioned earlier, there is another scene, I can't remember where the setting is, but where you build the song and you're kind of so in it, I can almost hear the music. You do the same thing with villains, where you weave in actual lines from Shakespeare.
Hmm.
The the characters, like drama students do, preppy drama students do, they speak to each other in Shakespearean language. They use
Yeah.
lines, and I think that music is so effortlessly woven in. Definitely your experience in critiquing and reviewing comes through, because it's not like when you're reading, shame, poor Tolkien, I always kind of rag him on this, when you're reading Lord of the Rings and they stop to do a song and you're just like, I'm just going to page over the songs because I can't right now.
Yeah.
It really is woven in quite effortlessly. Makes me want to, I'm going to be deep diving into this playlist for a good
Oh,
few
good.
months after this. I love it. Guys, readers, listeners, there's a hot wax hit list at the back. Is it at the back of each book, Em?
It's not in every edition. We're working on getting a playlist like up online that's easier to find.
Ah,
So the hit list is only 30 songs. I actually made another playlist for this book that's like the whole soundtrack that's like 8 hours long.
where is it?
Um, it's 130 songs. I put them all in order. It was a lot of work. I'm in the process of transitioning off of Spotify just because their politics are so appalling in the States and they do not pay artists fairly.
Gotcha.
So I'm working on transitioning that playlist to a different platform. And as soon as I have that up, I'll put links on all my socials. But yeah, as you say, very much in the same way that the Shakespeare is kind of shot through all of Villains, the music, not just the songs by Gill and the Kills, which is the band in the book. I had to write those songs, which was a whole different story.
Yeah.
Not just their songs, but also the characters are constantly talking about real music. It's their frame of reference for everything. So Gil and Suzanne, the way they speak to each other, their conversation is littered with references to existing bands and existing songs and musical genres, all that kind of thing. And music becomes sort of a shorthand for how good somebody's taste is, how interesting a person they are, like what kind of little subcultures they're involved in. Because that's very true to the scene that I'm often in, which is with real serious music nerds. That is the way they talk to each other, much like the kids and villains are constantly speaking this kind of like pigeon Shakespeare. You spend enough, like if you go to a record fair and just kind of hang around for a while, you will notice that same kind of like,
Right.
it's almost like a second language that everybody is speaking, and it's sometimes used for gatekeeping, which I don't love. Like you can sort of tell how long somebody's been on the scene based on how they use vocabulary around vinyl, and some people are gatekeeping about it, which I don't love. But it is interesting that any subculture has its own language and its own vocabulary. So that was something that came very naturally for me in the writing of Hot Wax. I was like, yeah, I know all these characters so well, and I know exactly what kind of music they like and what their references would be. It's another level of characterization that for the real serious music nerds out there will be a whole separate kind of
Right.
layer to the text.
So Holly Berkeley's Deep Cuts is being optioned, or has been optioned, and is making its way onto the big screen, or the silver screen. And those songs are coming to life, much like Daisy Jones and the Six. So twofold, what was it like writing the music? Obviously, you write prose. It's a whole different process here. Writing lyrics to songs that don't exist. And then secondly, do you have a melody or a song in mind for if they are ever produced, or any plans for production of those songs?
Sure. I actually told my agent not too long ago that I do not want to put this up for option. I don't want Hot Wax to ever be adapted for screen, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is Hollywood cannot make good music movies. Like it just can't. There is a good movie about music once in a blue moon. Hollywood gets it wrong every single time. They can't even make good biopics about real artists. Like they're always bad. They're always bad. Every now and then you get like an Almost Famous that you're like, okay, I'll allow it. And that's partly because Cameron Crowe, like whose life that movie is based on, was very much in the scene and was involved in,
And whose book
or you
is
get
now
like,
out. Did you know that?
yeah, I just saw that. Yeah.
That's
My friend Liz
crazy.
Briggs just went to go see his event. I've read a lot of his writing just from back when he was, doing music journalism as a teenager
Yeah, that's
in the
crazy.
70s. But yeah, Hollywood just can't get music movies right, and I don't trust them with this as far as I could throw them. Also, like not everything needs to be a movie. Like
Of
just let it be a book.
Of
I
course.
like
Like,
books as books. I just, the other thing about it is having been a child actor, I have some serious like ethical reservations about what you would have to put a child actor through to make this as a
yeah,
movie.
that's true.
And I just feel so deeply icky about that. I was like, nope, this one doesn't need to be adapted. But as for the lyric process, that was really tough. That was actually the most daunting part of it for me because I'm not a poet. All of my attempts to write poetry have been deeply embarrassing for all involved. But the music industry is so stingy about letting you reprint lyrics that I was like, okay, eventually I'm gonna just have to write songs for this band. And it's not very sexy and not very rock and roll, but it was a lot of research is really what went into that, was me sitting down and going, okay, first of all, what kind of a song is this? Because a band like Gill and the Kills that has so many musical influences, they're going to write a lot of different kinds of songs. So thinking about like, an 8-minute power ballad is really different from like a 2-minute pop hit, and the structures of those songs and the lyrics of those songs are going to be really different. So I would figure out what kind of a song is this, and then make a playlist of a bunch of songs that felt kind of similar to that, what I was trying to do. Look very closely at the structure of the music and the structure of the lyrics, how they work together, and really just kind of like analyze what's happening in this kind of music from this point in time. And then the second part of it is the character research, because I'm writing the songs, but I'm writing the songs as Gil or as Vince, who's the other songwriter in the book.
Oh, what
Two
a
very
good
different.
character, by the way, Vince.
Oh, thank you. I love Vince, and I'm going to try to avoid spoilers
Yeah,
around Vince,
yeah.
but Vince was one of those characters who just kind of came through the wall, and I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, you're here now,
Left,
and you're kind of taking over."
yeah, left of field,
Um,
that character, yeah.
yeah, which is partly what makes Babelmouth fun, I think.
Mm.
But so the second part of that research was thinking about, okay, this is a 12-bar blues. Gil's writing it. What are his musical influences? What are his lyrical influences? What kind of themes are going to come to the fore when he's writing this kind of a song? And then it was a lot of just kind of, some of these songs took literally like 10 years for me to get them right. Some of them were in the very first draft and have been adapted over and over again over the years. And then as I got better at it and more comfortable in Gil's voice as a songwriter and in Vince's voice as a songwriter, towards the end of the process, I did have songs that kind of just came out of nowhere and even had like tunes to go with them. One of them was Handful. Handful came out of nowhere as I was in a crosswalk in Bankers Hill and I almost got hit by a car because I was like, I need to write this down right now. Um, Another one was Minnie's Place. That was very late. I think we were already in copy edits and I texted my editor and I was like, can I add one more bit of lyrics because I just really think Gil and the Kills need to have a drinking song. And God bless my editor, he was like, yeah, go for it.
I love
So
it.
yeah, that was something because it was a whole new kind of writing. That was something I think I got better at over time and got more comfortable with.
I love the that you researched, like you're writing as the character, and you researched what his influences would be.
Oh, of course.
That's fascinating. I mean, and obvious, but like that just is testament to the depth of research it took to really give Hot Wax the impetus that it has. And I mean, like you mentioned in the very beginning, you have this diehard following of villains. And you're now coming off of the kind of Northern Hemisphere promo tour of Hot Wax, two very different novels. What has the overall reception been for Hot Wax?
It's been a mixed bag, which is kind of what I expected. The interesting thing is most of our trade reviews have been very positive, which is really encouraging. We got this fabulous review in the UK that called it the best music about rock and roll since High Fidelity, which just like gonna frame that and put that on my
Yeah.
wall. It's interesting. I think what's been the most clear to me in this process, and again, like I knew this was gonna happen, a lot of the really diehard readership for villains, they're all quite young.
Mm.
They're all very, very young still. They're discovering it just now, even though it came out years ago. They're in university, they're in their late teens and early 20s. And I think for a lot of them, Hot Wax is not quite hitting because it's not about that time of life. And it's about a lot of stuff that they have not experienced yet. So there is definitely a contingent of younger readers who are just kind of like mad that it's not villains and don't really get what it's about. At the same time, the readers who get it really get it. The
Mm.
readers who get it really get it and are latching onto it in a real serious way. And I have noticed that that tends to be people who are a little bit older in their 30s and 40s. They've got a little more perspective on it. They probably actually remember some of the analog media days. So that's not totally surprising to me that I'm seeing that split a little bit. One thing I've seen that's actually been really pleasantly surprising is that male readers have had a really positive response to this book, which we tend to sort of overemphasize how important it is the way men react to books, especially in the US, where the makeup of book buyers is like 70% female.
Right.
And this book is so much about a woman in middle age kind of grappling with all of these things that are very specific to her experience. And a lot of the men in the book really don't come off very well. Truly, no one in this book comes off super well, except for maybe Doug.
Yeah.
But I've had a number of male readers reach out to me about how deeply they loved this book and how much they felt like it was written for them. And some of that, I'm sure, has to do with also the way we gatekeep rock and roll about something that is not for women. Because
Mm.
that's something I've certainly encountered, and that's definitely been kind of part of that scene from time immemorial. So I actually really didn't know if there was going to be a backlash to this about like, how dare you as a woman write about this thing that we as men think we own. And so that's been a really pleasant surprise is to see how many male readers have like really, really loved this book.
Yeah, you've earned the respect of these male readers. That's interesting, and I think that there would be, like I say, we've got a huge, fan base in South Africa for live music. We've got
Hmm.
great live musicians. We love our rock and roll. Um, Funnily enough, and seeing as you really leverage your honesty, and I love it, and I think that that's quite refreshing actually to hear you, talk about Hollywood the way that you do, and obviously the politics in the States. Really is something that as artists and writers, with a platform that we need to draw attention to. But in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, Dave Matthews is a South African. I mean, I'm not a hardcore fan at all. But do you have the same kind of gripes with Dave Matthews as Susanna does?
Um, I do a little bit. That is to this day, that is my editor's favorite joke in the whole book. And it's less, that's one of those things that is less about my personal opinion of Dave Matthews, which really doesn't matter. Also, like, Dave Matthews is doing fine. I'm not worried
Yeah.
about him.
He's
Um,
his career's not crippled because of the joke you made in the book on his behalf.
no. And that moment is much more about, it's about the thing we were just talking about like the way music nerds talk about music as kind of a second language. That is shorthand for the kind of listener that Rob is.
100%.
Um,
You like stamped him. I was like, oh yes, okay. That's a significant diss that even I get.
and the fact that he doesn't understand that it's kind of a diss is sort of important. For those of you who haven't read the book, there's a moment where Suzanne says to Rob, Rob, your favorite band is Dave Matthews. Her point being that his musical taste is very, very surface level. Um, and, like if you talk to real serious music nerds, especially in the rock space, Dave Matthews and maybe also like a Coldplay have sort of become shorthand for people who kind of never go beyond top 40 and don't really ever want to listen to music that is challenging them in any way. So yeah, Dave Matthews, Coldplay have become sort of like music nerd shorthand for this as like milquetoast soft rock,
Yeah.
which I happen to agree with that characterization,
Good. It was
which
good.
is not to knock anyone who likes Dave Matthews. Like, I'm sure you're just hearing something there that I'm not. And, there's something to be said for comfort music that is not asking anything of us. Like, there's a
Right.
time and a place. But yeah, that is very much an instance of, and that's a great example of kind of like how dialogue can do a lot of work for characterization. Like, you don't need to hear me talk about Suzanne's opinion about that band and what that means to her. You don't need to hear about Rob's history of musical taste for that moment to make sense and tell you kind of everything you need to know
Mm.
about the relationship between those two characters at the moment. So, yeah, a lot of the music references, they're not random. They're doing some heavy lifting for the cognoscenti, if you will.
It's a great show don't tell moment in a lot of places within the book. It's yeah, that was a favorite of mine. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. One thing that I want to highlight, and I'm going to ask you if you don't mind to read some of
Sure.
your work, is the kind of the family dynamics is something we haven't touched on. It runs heavy throughout the book. You spoke about trauma, we're speaking about different, and that was a huge kind of bugbear, and the significant difference between Rob and how he grew up and Suzanne and how she grew up and how they were just never going to work as a couple. But there's really endearing moments between Gil and Suzanne as father and daughter. And I think that you've captured that moment in a really kind of soft place, but within the grittiness of rock and roll. So if you don't mind just telling us where kind of in the book this is setting us up.
Sure. In some ways, this book is sort of a love story. It's like a family love story about a really close bond between a father and daughter that gets severed in this really traumatic, terrible way, and her kind of reckoning with that for the rest of her life. But there are a lot of nice moments, and I do think that even though Gil is not doing the best job being a dad, he does really love his daughter and really care about her. He makes the wrong decisions over and over and over again, but there is some real deep love there. And this is kind of the only summer that they really get to spend together. So I think it's very special and important for both of them until it ends in catastrophe,
Mhm.
because that's how everything I write goes. But yeah, so this is kind of early on in the tour when Suzanne is on the road with the band and she's kind of found her place. She's kind of found her place being their gopher and running around and there to kind of be her dad's number one fan. So this is shortly after he comes off stage and she goes backstage to kind of debrief with him about the gig. She loved the sound and the feel of his laugh, how it crackled and sparked. Making him laugh felt like she could do magic. Never change, kid, he told her. You really are one of a kind. You think someday I'll be somebody like you? He blinked, the laugh snagged in his mouth. Ah, honey, he said, I sure hope not. Her heart swerved. She'd made him laugh, then made him sad. She wanted to unask the question, take it back. But his answer bruised her too, unsure why he'd renounced their precious likeness. They weren't one of a kind, or so she thought. They were two. She slid down out of his lap, kicked through pieces of his costume discarded on the floor. Little things she never noticed from a distance, but the outfit wouldn't be complete without the crucifix earring, silver toe caps, each with two tiny spikes like a bull's horns. His style, like his stage presence, playfully promiscuous. What do you really offer an audience? She'd heard Louis ask on a strategy call some years ago. Gil thought about the answer for no time at all. Something indescribable. Thanks, Louis said dryly. That's helpful. A one-of-a-kind, indescribable somebody. No sweat. But there was sweat in buckets and blood and tears, flat tires and broken strings, and late nights and early mornings with empty bellies and empty pockets in between. Music was music, inviolable in its way, but entertainment? That was a whole other animal, too big and brutish to be tamed. Even Suzanne had felt the shocks. Gil's punishing rehearsal schedules, Gracie's short temper when they ran short of time or money, Nash's frequent nausea, Skelly's evil attitude. They loved the show, loved the road, loved each other in their way, but love wasn't enough to live on.
Hmm. So good. And I think that really captures the kind of band on the road, you know, touring texture of it, and really, I'm not even giving it justice by calling it that. Jennifer Egan calls you a force to be reckoned with. Matt Osman says this is an amps up to 10 rock and roll classic. I would agree. You've got quite a few rock and roll classics on the playlist we spoke about. We're going to be hooking our listeners and our viewers up with this hit list. I'll stay closely connected to your socials, and we'll definitely be updating. But I mean, we've got Bowie, we got Blondie, we got Beastie Boys, man. Beastie Boys. What is it hard? Joy Division. God, there's so much. Led Zeppelin, Guns N' Roses. Is it hard to nail Hot Wax down to one song that can describe it, that can underpin it?
Oh God, impossible. Because like you have the hit list and I have a big playlist that's coming, but there were like 7 or 8 playlists that went into this book because each of the characters in the band had their own playlist for their own um genealogy of, because a band is the sum of its parts, and every performer is going to bring their own musical influences into the room and onto the stage. And indeed, that's where some of the conflict comes from, is different artistic ideals for different people in the band.
Right.
Ask Me Tomorrow and you would get a different song, but just because it comes up early in the narrative, and I think it's a really good one, is Prince's Baby I'm a Star. I think is a great encapsulation of kind of what Gil is chasing. So it definitely doesn't cover the whole book, because it would be impossible, I think, to find like one Franken song that encapsulated all of it. But
Right.
I do love Baby I'm a Star as kind of a representation of the thing that Gil is chasing.
I mean, I do understand it's an impossible question. Another near impossible question for many writers, but I believe you have an answer, so I'm going to ask it. What's next for you, M? For ML Rio, what can fans look forward to from here? Because you're coming off the tail end of promoing Hot Wax, but you're heading straight into silly season working on something else.
Yes. So I'm under contract for another book with Simon and Schuster, and I have to have a draft of that in June. You can hear my brain screaming in the background. One of my professors recently referred to me as 10 obsessions in a trench coat, which I think is really accurate. Got the Shakespeare book, got the Dad Rock book.
I love that.
I'm 10 obsessions in a trench coat, but I'm also like secretly a 65-year-old man who loves Shakespeare and Dad Rock and also old Humphrey Bogart movies. I really love film noir, especially in the winter, like this time of year. It just feels kind of perfect to go home and, you know, sit on the couch drinking hot chocolate and watching Touch of Evil. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit weird for the holiday
No,
season, but
100%. Yeah, that's when
um,
we have the holiday season in summer, and even we want to do that.
right. So film noir and like the roman noir as a sort of aesthetic concept is another thing that I really love and have done a really deep dive on lately. And I also think it's very apropos to the moment that we find ourselves in. Like noir emerged from this moment of kind of post-World War II existential crisis about everything, really, just sort of like the absolute moral failure of the entire world, and sort of confronting the fact that like, oh, we are this evil on
Mm-hmm.
some level.
Mm-hmm.
So noir is kind of constantly in conversation with that question of like, what does this mean for us as a species? What does this mean for us as humans? What does this mean for us politically? What does this mean for us artistically? So I don't think it's entirely surprising that I find myself coming back to that in this particular moment when it feels like the world is completely spinning off its axis. And it's there's something hopeful, I think, about look at the incredible art that emerged from this really dark period in history in the late 1940s. So I'm kind of clinging to that as like maybe sort of a guiding light for what to do next. But I did have a conversation with my editor about kind of wanting to go in this more sort of traditional roman noir direction, and he didn't hate that idea. So that's kind of what I'm working on next, as difficult as it is to make that sound sexy to 22-year-old readers.
No,
Yeah,
listen,
we're gonna see if we can do a little film noir.
I love it. I'm very excited. I'm a fan. I'm not 22, okay? That much is obvious. And hot.
Honestly, you couldn't pay me to be 22 again.
No, same, same. I feel the same way. But if we were villains, hit me hot, hot wax, got me in the feels. I'm so looking forward to roman noir, whatever may come of it. Your writing
Thank you.
really, it's got me. You're edgy, cool. You're cerebral. You got a freaking PhD in the stuff that I love. And I really wish I could just like drink your brain for a bit, if that would help in any way
Oh
with me.
man.
But yeah, it's
I don't know that I don't know if I would wish that on you,
with
but
that. You don't want me to do
I mean,
a deeper dive into that?
in a way, like if you're reading my books, you kind of are drinking my
Yeah,
brain. Like that is sort of the essence of it. That's pretty much what's rattling around in there. So yeah,
well,
that's
I
pretty
love it.
close.
For anybody looking at the moment to drink ML Rio's brain, hot wax, there's a lot going on. There's so much going on. Those who live fast shall die slow, a devil like you ought to know. Sounds like a lyric to me. This has been a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to read. And ML Rio, it's been a pleasure to have you on TGE's Current Read. I have loved this. I loved If We Were Villains. Again, I'm going to eat up anything that you write down. Frick, I need to make a note to get Graveyard Shift onto my bookshelf
Oh,
ASAP.
well, thank you so much. This has been lovely. Really appreciate taking the time to talk to you.
Oh, so great. Yeah, and on to the next one. I can't wait to chat about number 3 and then Graveyard Shift once I've slotted that in. Thanks,
Yeah,
for your
that'd be
time.
great. Yeah, have a good one.
You too.